Love podcasts, hate nonsense. The PoliticsJOE podcast, ladies and gentlemen. Ava Santina.
Good afternoon.
James Cowling.
Good afternoon.
Tom Tugendhat.
Good afternoon.
What a lineup. Heavy hitters.
See, the opening, if you don't clap, then you end up...
Sus.
Peter Kyle pops out of nowhere and he says that you love Jimmy Savile.
I'm really surprised that they've still held that line.
Yeah.
That, you know, if you want to use Spotify or use Wikipedia and not give them your ID, then that makes you a pedo, apparently.
I spent quite a lot of time as security minister encouraging people to use VPNs for protection online.
Yeah.
If we're going to make them illegal, we've got a real problem.
Big time.
With some other areas of government policy.
Well, one of them, I think it was Proton or Nord, when they put out their release saying, we've had a 1,000% interest, increase in spike in interest around this, that we would typically identify with sort of widespread civil unrest in a developing nation. And
wow.
Like, obviously, when the internet got shut down, dissidents are trying to access free information. And instead, it's happening because of our relatively, I would say, quite draconian attempts to make the internet a safer place to be.
Yeah. Well, also the hyper-focus on porn, I think, from Labour ministers is really fun. That's good fun.
Yeah.
Because that Jess Sato, the first tweet she did, 6:30 in the morning, tries to go on Pornhub and can't get on. Amazing.
It's tough stuff. Tough stuff. We're here because we're going to be talking about the Conservative Party. We're going to be talking about younger voters and efforts to kind of, I guess, reignite. That's probably the right word. Reignite sort of interest in voting Conservative for those younger people. James, you're part of a grouping called Next Gen Tories. You tell us what the Next Gen Tories are. What does that mean?
So we're essentially a pressure group that started about 3 years ago, trying to drag the Conservative Party back to delivering for and appealing to younger voters in quite a stretched sense of right up to the age of 45 is how we define it now, which in Conservative circles, that is still a young voter. And
in the UK, it's still a younger voter.
Yeah.
And the way I think about it is there are core things that people achieve in their lives that make them more likely to vote Conservative. It's being able to have a decent wage, save some money, afford your own home, buy a home, and start a family if you want to. Those things make a stronger economy, stronger communities, and make people likely to vote Conservative. And over the course of the last government, we lost focus on that. And I think we lost focus on our pitch to those people. And I think there's a very compelling Conservative pitch, particularly now in reflection to Labour and Reform, to say those people, particularly 20s, 30s, 40s, who are taxpayers, going to be taxpayers for quite a long time, we can be on your side. We can build you that home. We can make it easy to start a family. We can give you more in your pocket. That's kind of the direction that I want the Conservative Party to go on by the time of the next election.
I think the slightly reductive or simplistic challenge, but I do think it distills the problem quite nicely, is that if you think about it in a small c Conservative, conserving things, a younger voter will say, well, I have very little interest in conserving the status quo. It doesn't serve me. I still live with my mum and dad. I have reduced wages that have been hammered by either inflation or fiscal drag, take your pick. My prospects don't look very good. What interest do I have in conserving this way of life? I don't want to. I actually want to possibly burn it all down. I want something radically different. And I guess the challenge for you guys is how you answer that critique.
I think you can be both radical and conservative. It's to say we are radically changing the way that things work and the way things operate to return to the type of Conservative Party that we used to have and the type of country that we used to have. Every post-war Conservative government led to a big increase in GDP per capita, apart from the past one, because we were afraid of doing some of the things that we'll talk about, house building, etc. So you can say we want a Conservative vision. We are cautious about what we want and the way that we think the state operates and it presses on people's lives, but also recognise a lot of things need to change. And having a clear plan that you run up well in advance of an election is how you do that, to say this is exactly what you're going to get. Some of it might be tough, but this is what you're going to get and this is how we're going to do it.
What's number one on that list of changing? I know you're probably going to say house building, but I think what Oli was touching upon there is the sort of, and also, you did address it there about GDP not increasing during the last administration. When you're looking at young people who've experienced 15 years of wage stagnation, how would you convince them that next time you'll get it right or you'll do it better?
You need to articulate a really clear plan. And I mean, all of the evidence is there about wage growth has stagnated because growth and productivity have stagnated. Those two things have stagnated because we haven't built much. So you go, right, these are all the types of planning reforms that we're going to do. And we can talk more about the type of homes we want to build and how you do that. But you link those two things and you say, that's why you can't afford your home and your wages are low. It's mainly, there are other things, obviously, immigration is a factor that we probably disagree on, that you then need to kind of front run and articulate. But people are right to say, why should we trust you this time? And I think part of it is a lot of our MPs like Tom, who really gets it. I mean, we agree on quite a lot of this, have the experience to know the pitfalls and traps and how you work with civil service and how you deliver it. Right? That's what I think of as Conservative Party 2.0, where we should get to, should be using the experience of people like Tom, who've been in government, and newer people and new change in direction that we should try to push towards.
So, Tom, how do you slot into, first of all, next-gen Tories, but also, do you agree with the diagnosis we just heard there?
Yes, fundamentally, I do. And to Ava's point, actually, you're right. If we try and run a brand argument again, it's going to fail. It's going to fail. By the way, it's not just us. Look at the Labour brand, look at the Lib Dem brand, look at all the brands right now. They're really tarnished. Why? Because they're not really offering an actual deliverable system of government that will help people to get what they need. And that's why, look, I'm entirely supportive of what James is talking about, because this is about a fundamental inequality in our economic system. It's a broken social contract, right? You know, a fundamental conservative principle is you do well, you hand on something good and prosperous and stable to your kids, and they hand it on to theirs, and so on. I mean, this is pure Burke, right? And this is absolute conservatism 101. And yet, that's not what happened in the last 15 years. Now, I can go over many reasons if you like, but that's a history exercise. What I'm much more interested in is, what are we going to do tomorrow? What are the plans that we have to get ready now? So that when we get to the choice in whatever it is, 3-4 years' time, it's not a choice between one brand and another brand, with both brands being solid for one reason or another. It's actually a choice between actual plans and, you know, a real plan of what you can do. And that's what I think that we need to spend this time, you know, talking about. And there's a lot of things that we need to say that, let's be honest, when we talk about planning, I mean, I can tell you as an MP in Kent, house building isn't always very popular, right?
Yeah, I don't think that's a Kent-specific problem.
No, but it's, you know, it's one of those things we need to talk about it now, because we need to talk about it in a way so that people know what's coming. Now, I'm not going to pretend this is going to make me the most popular guy in the world. It's not. But we do need to talk about it. We need to talk about the fact that the pension industry has massively distorted wealth allocation to support effectively government debt, which is supporting older people and established people's spending rather than investing in growth. We need to talk about the fact that planning, not just in housing, but also in terms of industry and opportunity and jobs and so on, hasn't just constrained people's life chances, as James has been talking about it. You're much less likely to start a family, to get married, to all those sort of early life things if you don't have a house. But actually, it's constrained growth. It's constrained people from starting businesses, from, you know, doing any number of different things. So, you know, this is a very fundamental thing, and I'm not going to pretend it's going to be popular at every stage. It won't, but we do need to set that up, that agenda.
We had Dr. Eliza Philby in here not so long ago, and she was talking about how the Bank of Mum and Dad is doing too much heavy lifting.
She's written brilliantly about the inheritocracy. Yeah,
she has. Do you think that sort of widening gap between the parents who have and the parents who have not, what do you think that is? What do you think the repercussions of that are on young people at this time?
Well, it's clear that one of the reasons for that is, if you don't get growth in anywhere else in the economy, the only thing you end up with is asset price inflation. Now, the most obvious bit of that is housing, but actually it's true in other bits of asset classes as well. So what you've got to do is you've got to find ways of making sure that everybody can get growth, everybody can seek their chance to, you know, grow the economy, grow their own lives, you know, increase their own productivity, increase their salaries. And, you know, you raised the point there about, you know, if you don't have a stake in the future, what the hell are you conserving? You're not really. So what you've got to do is you've got to find ways of doing that. Now, I agree with Eliza, as she calls it, the inheritocracy has become very powerful, but it's become powerful because the other systems of growth have failed. Right, that mattered a hell of a lot less in the 60s and 70s when people were actually growing the economy through, if you like, startups, through that natural growth of the economy. And it's not impossible. Just look at the startup economy around the United Kingdom that gets to a certain stage and fails, and then compare it with the United States. Now, you're not going to tell me that taxes on inheritance are lower in the United States. They're not. They have zero inheritance tax. Right? So in theory, that should stimulate a greater inheritocracy, but it doesn't. Why not? Because the rest of the economy is growing, so it balances out.
When you talk about assets have obviously, houses.
Mostly in the UK, it's housing. Yeah.
Yes. But when if you're talking to the people of Kent and you say, okay, we've got to build homes in your area, well, that is probably going to decrease the value of many of their assets. How do they receive the news that you would like to build in the area?
You're not talking about building just in Kent. You're talking about building over the whole of the United Kingdom, building property in places where those houses need to go.
Where do you think those places are?
So it's focusing. Just look at where people want to live. You don't ask me the question. Look at where people want to live. People want to live in urban areas. People want to live in towns. It is consistent. And by the way, every single poll shows this, and every single estate agent will tell you it. People want to live in urban areas,
and it's where you get the productivity gains. So the UK is a densely populated country, but it's very evenly spread. You can densify cities, so London, Birmingham, Manchester, quite significantly. And you have international examples. So in New Zealand, they said you can build 6 stories. If you meet the right planning criteria, you can build it off the bat. You don't have to get permission from a locally elected body. And Britain Remade, the think tank, said if you did that in London for some of those central areas near a tube line or whatever, you would lower rents by about £6,000. And I would flip it and say, if you had a Conservative Mayor of London candidate who said, I'm going to do that policy, and the effect for a couple renting a 2-bed flat would be that you get £6,000 a year back, I think that's something that is appealing. And the flip to people who already have, a large asset, a house that they paid off the mortgage for, to keep our level of spending going, the economy has to grow at 3% a year before you start cutting welfare, pensions, the health service, or taxing more. So basically, the choice is this. We either have a serious plan about getting the economy going, or you get this tax and spend doom loop. And I think you can have an appealing answer, which is we'll densify cities, there'll be make it easier to build in villages and towns in a small way, but quickly. So there are answers there, but you have to be really honest with people of this, I don't want anything, I don't want any change, but I want loads of spending. It is a farce. And politicians need to say that for the next 5 years, because the economic crunch is coming. Might be in 2 years' time, might be in 5 years' time, but it really is coming if we don't change our trajectory.
I think in a couple of the answers that we've heard so far, it's come up a couple of times whether or not building can be politically popular. You used the phrase appealing there as well. And I think we kind of need to just open this up for discussion, really, because I think you're right. House building previously, certainly with a certain demographic in this country, was enormously unpopular and probably quite politically toxic. And it would explain why a whole host of politicians we were talking before we started recording about various politicians who have opposed all sorts of things from reservoir building to housing developments, etc. And the reason for that, I think quite clearly, is because they believe they could accrue political capital in opposing those things.
Yeah.
But there is a bit of a generational schism here, right. I think, that for younger people actually know YIMBYism can actually be quite sort of politically motivating. I don't know what your guys' perspective is on the political popularity or the political weight of doing either of those things.
So of the new intake, we got almost all of the new intake of Conservative MPs. Most of them are in their, I would say, early 30s, 40s, who really got it. So they signed a joint letter by NGT saying, we need to fix this intergenerational problem. We need to build more in the right places. We need to make it easier to start a family. We need to grow the economy. And we need to be unapologetic about having a plan for that. And of those new intake of MPs that I speak to, 2 of them actually joined NGT before they were selected to be MPs. And they were like, I can't believe that you guys aren't a bigger thing in the party. You aren't yet, kind of you'd like a startup, right? So I think within a generation, not even a generation, within 5-10 years, the Conservative Party will look totally different.
Let me just address it. Look, I've been an MP in Kent for 10 years. I've never opposed a housing project, not once. I don't, because I don't think it's the right thing to do. First of all, it's not within my capability. It's a local government thing. Secondly, you're balancing off different interests, right? You're balancing off the interests of the people who are living there today against the people who are going to live there tomorrow. That's a really difficult balance to do. And I think it's the right thing to do is for my role is to encourage growth and encourage opportunity in that community. Now, there is a community in West Kent I don't represent anymore, actually, but it's a particularly good example, so I'm going to pick it up, which is Kings Hill, right? It used to be an RAF base up until the 80s. It was then, derelict land and whatever else. And it's got about 6,000 homes on it now, and it's got plans for another few. Mm. Every few years, I used to get a series of letters, not that many actually, objecting to the next phase of housing. It's like, guys, I respect what you've done, okay? I get the pressures on your community, and I get the pressures on your resources, and I get the pressures on us to deliver better school, better hospital, better, connection to town or, London or Maidstone or wherever it happens to be. Mm. But this is the perfect place to be building houses. And if you want your kids to have homes, which you do, and if you want those homes to be somewhere near you, which most of you do, then, you don't really have a choice, right? And this is where, I think I don't think we've got the luxury of the soft soaping and the gentle dishonesty that we've seen over 20 years of politicians going, yes, you can have everything. You can't have everything. There's a real choice here, right? Mm. Do you want to have growth in this economy? If you do, then you've got to look again at how you invest money. You've got to look again at how you defend established asset wealth, housing being the most obvious one, but there are others. And you've got to look at being pretty frank with people about saying, look, if you vote for that, you can vote for anything you like, right? But if you vote for that, then these are the consequences.
I think that I would say, I'm going to speak for Oli here, and we would agree with you up to this point, especially on the Michael Gove argument of density. It always does seem totally nonsensical that we're not building up. Why are we building out? But then it comes to immigration. And I think this is probably where we'll split.
Yeah.
The argument that is put forward by most conservative thinkers is that immigration is the reason that you can't get a house anymore, that you can't rent at an affordable level. Is that still where you're at with next generation Tories?
The whole debate frustrates me because I think most people within a political slant choose their answer for the housing crisis. It's, if you're on the left, it's supply side problems. If you're on the right, it's immigration problems. If you're on the libertarian right, it's quantitative easing. And the truth is all of those things. And I think there's a sensible conservative position to say, if 17 million people come here between 2001 and now, clearly that will push up demand. Like the laws of supply and demand, I think you can't escape. They are just fundamental. If you increase demand, you're going to increase prices. If you fail to increase supply, you're going to increase prices. To be clear, I think you have the benefit of that is just true. But I don't think you should focus totally on immigration. It's more about there is a level of immigration that we can absorb, and then there's a level of immigration that you can't absorb because you get to a point where services do creak, housing does become more expensive, and the trade-off becomes not worth it. And really, everybody would probably agree with that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I would agree with that. I think it's cognitively dissonant to sort of hold the position like, oh, we should build a ton more housing to reduce house prices, to reduce rents. If that's the logic of your argument, that is reciprocated by, okay, well, if there are more people demanding housing, if there are less houses, then the prices are going to go up. I think the point for me, and it's kind of the through line actually that Tom was talking about there in terms of sort of opposition to local housing developments, you say, right, okay, so what's your concern? Increase the traffic. Okay, maybe we can build a bypass. I can't get a GP appointment. All right, well, maybe we'll build a GP practice as part of the housing development. Mm-hmm. The thing for me is, if we're going to sort of say, okay, we can't sustain immigration at this level, let's identify where we think those people shouldn't be coming from. Is it people on student visas? Is it people on working visas? Is it the Hong Kongers? Is it the Ukrainians? Which of those people are you saying shouldn't come here? But if they do come here, why can't the answer be, okay, well, let's build more services, let's build more amenities, and let's build more housing. And by the way, I think sort of the lack of house building and particularly social housing, I'm looking at right to buy. and back to the 80s. And obviously rents have been increasing for a while now, but I don't think sort of the issues in housing can only be traced back, and I'm not saying you think this as well, can only be traced back to that sort of 2001 or really post 2016 Boris wave, etc. Big influx in my view.
No, they clearly started before then. But it's all. I mean, just to James's point, the ONS who put out these figures every, I think they put them out every year, but forecasting 10 years in advance, their 2022 to 2032 figure says that the population is going to grow by 5 million. Fine, you say, okay, well, absorb that. But it's 5 million when the number of deaths is 6.8 million and the number of births is 6.8 million. So that entire 5 million is migration. Now that does change the pattern of movement because you're changing the way you build houses depending on how many people you've got, right? If you're building a house with, 2 parents, 2 kids, you're building one kind of house. If you're building flats for people, you're getting a different type of footprint. Do you see what I mean? Every single aspect of this has a different decision. So to James's point, it is simply true that migration is having an effect on this, right? I mean, it's not the only effect. It's not the only factor in the effect, but it is just true that migration is having an effect on this. It is also true that, family demographics have changed over 50 years. It's also true that a lot of other things have changed. It's also true that we haven't built enough. And this is why the planning regulations that we have created over the last, 70 odd years, have got us to a point where simply what we've done is we are defending established wealth against incoming wealth. And by that, that's pretty simple. It's old against young, right? I mean, and that's something we've got to address because the truth is it's not old against young in the sense that the old are winning and the young are losing. Everybody's losing, right? The old are losing because they're not,
it's tied together. It's totally tied together. That has to be the message.
And you don't get the growth that the pension needs, in order to generate the investment. The parent doesn't spend time with the kid. You lose that intergenerational connection and that social contract. And that's why this is a fundamentally conservative argument.
Do you think you say it's old versus young, but is there also an element of this which is landlord versus renter or landlord versus person who cannot
who owns the land?
Who owns the land?
Who's the landlord? Sorry.
What do you mean, who's the landlord?
Well, older people.
I see what you mean. Because what I was watching, sorry, I thought you meant I was of my hypothetical landlord.
No.
I don't know. Who's my landlord? I'm also, I don't know. I pay an agency. I've got no idea who my landlord is.
You live where you want to live.
But I was watching Robert Jenrick's video that he put out today. I think it was today or yesterday. And he was talking about house building.
Okay.
And he's talking about immigration and that being one of the main factors in why younger people can't get onto the housing ladder.
His videos are very good, by the way.
His videos are very slick.
Yeah.
But he was walking around NW1, which is actually not far from where we're sitting right now. And he was saying that mass unskilled migration is the reason that native Britons are now paying an extra £2,500 a year in rent. And I was looking at the area and I went to go and hypothetically rent a flat in NW1, and the cheapest flat I could find was a bedsit that was $1,750 a month, and the shower was next to the bed. And I just wonder, what unskilled migrant would be, which I guess would be classified as a care worker, who would be able to afford that? I don't imagine that they're the ones who are taking those homes.
But I think that's the wrong way of looking at it, because say if you're talking about people at the bottom end of the income scale, they come in and take, it's a bit like hermit crab shells. They come and take something at the bottom of the market and then that pushes somebody up. And it comes back to the fundamental thing of if there are too few homes, people are competing and that drives up prices. That's what it is. And I think the fundamental tension between our points is what's the cause? And I think a better way of looking at it is how do we fix this? And you can do the kind of supply side reform that we talk about, but even if you do that, we're short about 5 million homes. So if you're adding 1 million people a year, you're just never going to quite get there. You're never going to get your rent down to a more manageable level. So I think it's the trade-off on immigration has gone a little bit too far in recent years, far too far. But that's not it. And I think people need to articulate both of those things rather than saying immigration is my pet issue or housing is my pet issue. And in fairness to Rob, I think he would do both. So he brought forward, here's a good sort of, turning doors moment. He brought forward planning reforms that were quite ambitious and quite reasonable. What do you think would have led to a Conservative victory, or more likely Conservative victory, having higher growth and people being able to get on the housing ladder and having done all of those things, or what we did do, which was just duck the issue, right? It did not work for those MPs. Those MPs lost their seats. So it's doing both of those things and having the confidence to do those things.
I guess my challenge would come from sort of demographic realities, right? We have an aging population. The pension bill is getting bigger. The tax base is getting smaller. And if younger people who are going to be economically productive and work in the country aren't coming here, how do you address that? And then secondly, and also, by the way, I think on this second point, you can make a left-wing argument, right? Which is like, okay, we're not importing care workers from, if you look at recent figures, Zimbabwe, Nigeria, South and Southeast Asia, take your pick. And as a result of that, you can make the argument then, okay, so hopefully we will see wage growth because we're not suppressing wages by bringing these people in. And, there's a left-wing argument to be made there.
Right.
It's not necessarily one that I might make, but you can make it for sure.
The Democratic Party made that in the States for years. That was their argument against the open border in Mexico, right up until, I'm going to get it wrong, but about 10, 15 years ago, was that what you were doing effectively was it was the evil capitalists importing cheap labor in order to keep down the cost of the working American. And there's an element of truth in that here too. Of course there is, right? It applies in everything. The more people there are,
Yeah.
And this is why the left is losing the working class to some extent, because those traditional jobs that used to be better paying are now not worth it. And actually, on welfare, you can get similar levels of income. So I don't quite buy the argument, because people are coming over also bringing dependents, which net tips the balance. And also we have a very high number of people, Indigenous Brits, who aren't working. So it's not as if we don't have the people who could do those jobs. It's the wages are so low, a lot of people aren't working. It's not that's a simplified argument, but I think there is a solution that isn't mass immigration.
But, Blair was sort of, the precursor to what we're experiencing with this now. And particularly in the construction industry, this was like, a huge issue throughout the Blair years. Not to do a history lesson, because I know you don't want to do one, but why, if that was identified and if that was seen as, these wages are going to be driven down if you, quote unquote, import labour, why was that not the first thing that was changed under the Conservative governments? Why did you not halt those, people being brought in to work in these fields?
It's a fair challenge, and I'm not, I share my own part of the blame in this story too. As you know, I spent most of the recent few years in politics focusing on foreign affairs, security and defence. But, should I have been more vocal on this sort of issue? Yeah, I probably should. I think that's a fair criticism. You're right. I can explain it to you. I can't sort of excuse it. I can give you the explanation, but it doesn't make it right. These are difficult fights to have, right? You're having an argument with Kent County Council, for example, about the cost of social care, and you're trying to constrain the cost of local government, and the social care folk say to you, well, in that case, I need this amount of cheap labour. That's the deal. And so you end up in these arguments where, in the short term, you are constraining wage growth, you are constraining costs to the exchequer, to the taxpayer. But in the long term, what you're doing is exactly what James is talking about. You're changing the nature of demographics. In fact, when you looked at European demographics, it was pretty much, not exactly, but it was sort of one job, one migrant sort of thing. And in the last few years, it's 1 to 4, 1 to 5, I think it is. It's something like that. Because people are coming with their dependents, because they're coming on a visa, it's temporary, they're coming to...
But also, you could make an argument that perhaps you yourself are responsible for a large influx of immigration because of the Ukraine scheme and also the Hong Kong scheme, with your focus on foreign affairs during that time. But do you think that there's a morality point that sort of supersedes then the?
So I think there's two bits about migration, and I think it's worth sort of looking at what it is you're doing. I think when the British people, first of all, I think are extremely reasonable on this. So the opposition to Hong Kong or Ukraine has been, zero as far as I can tell. There might have been some, but as far as I can tell, there's been almost no opposition to either of those. Because actually people understand, look, this is, you're losing your liberty to communist tyranny, or you're literally being murdered by Russian violence. And the fact that you want to come to the UK, perfectly reasonable. For Ukrainians, it's temporary. For Hong Kong as well, they are British nationals. So it's merely recognising a fact that that British nationals under a slightly different nationality order, but they are British nationals. That's not the same as seeing large numbers of migrants coming for employment reasons or for or indeed on small boats, which is the most egregious. But and so people do understand it differently. And it is certainly true that those numbers count in the housing figure, if you see what I mean. But it's also true that I think British people understand that there is a difference between somebody who's facing immediate and violent persecution by Russians and somebody who's coming for an employment opportunity.
Just one final point on that. Sorry, I know that you're itching to move on, but the Afghan scheme that was the sort of blow up that we've seen over the last couple of weeks. Do you imagine that there will be a large influx of?
I just don't know, I'm afraid. I can't answer the question, and I'm not being funny about it, but I can't answer the question for the simple reason that there was a large list, but there's a lot of people who claimed who aren't valid. Now, I don't know what that number is. So when you hear the numbers, I think the last number I heard was 24,000. I'm absolutely certain 24,000 people have applied. But whether the real number who will be recognised as having served alongside British forces is 100 or 1,000 or 10,000, I just don't know, I'm afraid. So I can't answer.
We've spoken about generational fairness, maybe a bit of the sort of fiscal reward side of things. There's also a fun component, isn't there, to this conversation, and about the Labour Party. #Labour hates fun.
Yeah, that has resonated with people. I think just because it's a quite snappy hashtag, it's probably like a depressing reflection of social media. But it's something to say. I think there is a bit of a problem with local politics, but also the Labour Party, of siding with, whether it's noise complaints about a bar, the hours for a pub.
Say her name.
Whatever.
Get it out of it. Amy LeMay will never let you forget
Amy LeMay, God, I've forgotten about Amy LeMay.
I haven't.
It's this whole, you sort of side with a minority of voices who kind of bitch and moan about anything happening in their local area, and then the entire local community suffer. So actually we went and supported a pub nearby, the Setford, which is a good pub. That's the pub I'm going to go to after this. And they were at risk of being closed down because a couple of people who lived on that street, who bought houses on that street opposite the pub, so knowing that they were going to live opposite a pub, complained about really quite reasonable stuff of people are standing outside at 10 p.m. Yeah, it's a pub, And I think it speaks to what I want the Conservative Party to be a bit more about, which is liberty, the pro-growth in the broader sense of allowing people to get on with their lives, treading lightly on their lives, rather than siding with kind of vested interest of a few local NIMBYs, which is real. They are very vocal, but they aren't everybody. And it is a better world to side with, more fun stuff than the anti-fun brigade.
Opposition to festivals held in central London parks.
Yeah, exactly. It's all these people who, buy a house next to a pub, or are surprised that central London has concerts in summer. And it's like, well, if you want a really quiet life, go and live in Kent, right? And that's fine.
You're busy.
Yeah, you're busy. Or wherever.
There's 6,000 new homes on an
Yeah. We're going to build the homes for you in Kent. I think that's the kind of shift that we need to make. And it does really resonate with people.
Do you think Reform gets that?
Oh, I don't know. I think they will tell anybody anything. I genuinely don't think they'll have considered this type of policy area. Maybe they do. I mean, Farage likes a pint, but I can't see it something there.
And a smoke outside.
And a smoke
That's
outside.
probably, yeah. That's
Yeah,
very
Farage probably gets it. In fairness to him, I think he's probably pro-fun.
Because they make a lot. They make a lot of hay, don't they? Or they say, younger men are kind of pivoting to reform, and I mean, the polling sort of would appear that there is like a slight shift, but whether or not it's actually that substantial,
yeah,
I think you're still looking at between sort of 7 and 10% for people under 30 in terms of their level of support for reform. But he nonetheless sort of if you talk about it enough, it's almost like conceive, believe, achieve, right? Like you can talk it into existence. Oh, there's a youth quake happening in our favour. If you keep repeating it, people will eventually stop challenging you on it. But I don't necessarily know how much that's actually true. Do you know what I mean? Like, do they have younger interests at heart? Do they have nightlife at heart? Do they have...
No, but what is clear is he's been around in politics for 30 years, right? And as a friend of mine used to put it, there's no market in the world where brand awareness doesn't equate sales to at least some degree. Everybody's heard of it. But this isn't the jungle, right? This isn't, the next test isn't what are you going to eat, it's how you're going to fix the future. And complaining about the past, forgive me, isn't the question. I mean, it's an important question, but it's not the question that's going to change our lives for the next 5, 10, 15 years. And, all I've heard from reform, and, I wish I didn't have to say this now, but some of my friends have joined it. All I hear is that Britain is broken, Britain's best days are behind it, and Britain's screwed. And I just don't believe that. Fundamentally, the opportunities for us are enormous. The challenges are real. Right? I mean, you don't need to tell you that, them. The challenges are absolutely real. We've got a housing problem. We've got a welfare problem. We've got an NHS that frankly is struggling. We've got defence budget that is insufficient to meet the challenges we face. Time and again. But the reality is the solutions are also there, right? I mean, we all know that this country can achieve some remarkable things, but it can only achieve them if we start to refocus on what it is that reconnects that social contract, that actually makes generations work together and not be forced into the competition of landlord and tenant, if you see what I mean, but actually generates that kind of growth. Because I think this really can achieve a remarkable amount, but that does mean addressing the real challenges and not just pointing at them, complaining and wishing we were yesterday, which I'm afraid is what I hear from reform.
Will you miss Adam Holloway, who was just defected?
No. Not even slightly.
Is there this argument, right, about since Thatcher that reform's done more to shape the Conservative Party than any leader since her? Because
you mean Farage?
Farage has done more to shape the Tory party than since Thatcher than any other leader. Maybe the argument might go modernisation, perhaps, but whether it's a referendum on Europe, whether it's now seemingly pulling the party further and further to the right, you've got other big beasts, people like Suella Braverman and others arguing for a shift in that direction.
I would argue that the Conservative Party is the reverse. It's the Conservative Party hasn't done enough deep thinking, especially over the past 10 years, about what it is about. And that provides a vacuum for other people to start making arguments. We started to become a reflection of whoever the leader was at that one time, and also ducking difficult decisions. And my worry about reform is that they're going to do the same Ming-Val strategy that Labour did to try to get into power. The Economist said that they're promising 200 billion of unfunded spending / tax cuts. So they're saying, we're going to cut your taxes, but we're also going to cut inheritance taxes, and we're going to do spending on lots of different things. And that will immediately lead to either they're lying, or you'll immediately get a bond market wobble in the same way that Rachel Reeves did with her first budget, and indeed Liz Truss got as well. And I think what they're trying to do is get to a certain proportion of the vote by promising everybody everything. And what happens is, and we've seen it before, and we're seeing it now with the Labour Party, you get into power and you have 350, however many MPs on your backbenches who haven't been primed to make difficult decisions, who then immediately throw their toys out the pram because you haven't made the argument to the public, you haven't made the argument to the MPs. So this idea that Nigel Farage can come in as a prime minister and suddenly do lots of difficult decisions and fix the country, despite having laid none of the groundwork, is totally a farce. I would worry that any kind of angry young men who would subscribe to what he's saying would be really deeply disappointed. I think he's totally selling everybody a rope.
Do you think that will cut through, though, with the public? Because, I mean, firstly, you'd look at Labour and you'd say, well, it worked for them. And then, on the other side of it, you've got a public who perhaps might not, who don't have a lot of faith in you. Sorry to be blunt, but don't have a lot of faith in you at the moment. So they might make the argument that actually you've got a lot of false promises. At least Farage is giving us a bit of glitz and glamour with them, with his.
Yeah, that's why you have to be really honest with people.
Is Kemi Bade not being honest with people right now?
I think she's getting there, actually.
Yeah.
Talking about, Javier Milei, that is the start of saying we are spending too much as a society. That means we can't invest and we can't cut taxes and we're in a doom loop. She's getting there. She's been talking about housing recently. She's getting there on how we do that and the density. So those arguments are starting to happen. They just need to be really hammered for 5 years so that people trust us by the time we get to government.
The reason I ask is obviously she's the leader of the party.
Yeah.
Bobby J, Robert Jenrick, whatever you want to call him, he's making those arguments publicly. He has been along the lines of the stuff we've been talking about, right? And I mean, he's kind of your parliamentary champion, shall we say, for NGT. Would that be a fair way to describe him?
We've always been associated with, like, we have lots of thing, but it's always like, oh, you're, when we first started, it was, are you a Trussite party or a Sunakite party? And it's like, no, we just care about a handful of issues and the direction of the country. Yeah. And people were just like blown by that being, which in itself speaks to the problem that we're not about leadership vehicle. But yeah, Rob gets it, but Kemi gets it as well. And I think it's bringing the whole party along on that journey. So you've got that kind of group of 2,000 people in the broadest sense who actually really want to be like, right, as a party, we're going to deliver that change. Because it's not just about the leader. Because if you get in as leader and you haven't laid the turf, your party just throws you out. It's the same thing's happening with Starmer. He's looking really wobbly at the moment because he's not got the credibility. He's not laid the arguments. So people just get a new leader.
Even after his purge of the Labour Party, where he did have, he's got a number of Labour MPs that do vote with the whip. I think they definitely will actually when Parliament returns this September after they've seen what happens when you don't.
I don't know about you. Yeah, but I don't know. Does that communicate power? Does that communicate authority?
Well, actually, that'd probably be a better question for Tom. If you start expelling your MPs, does it communicate?
I don't think. Look, if there's a very specific thing you're trying to do, and it's a very clear, you were elected on this manifesto pledge, you promised to do this, you haven't, then yes. I'm not quite sure what they were expelled for. Right, and I follow politics pretty closely. Right? I'm not.
You could say
things not.
I'm not quite sure because it seems to be a range of issues. And what was it? What was the expression that somebody in number 10 came up with the expression that they were just being expelled for just being regular.
Knobheads.
Not headery, that's right. That was
Knob headery, yeah.
And it was like
doesn't quite count.
That's not. No. What have you? Those are really odd grounds.
Well, they did all have in common. They'd all been on PoliticsJOE in the months coming up to that.
Do you think I'm going to lose the level?
You are at risk, Tom.
I guess, this is a bit informal now, but I actually guessed the fourth one off the back of, there's only one other one that has recently been on in the last 4 weeks. Is it that one? And when I rang up someone to ask, they said yes.
They were
solid stuff.
That's good.
Yeah, media kingmakers on PoliticsJOE. Absolutely.
Do you think there needs to be a bit of a shuffling of the I don't know, moving around what's going with the current members of the Conservative
No,
Party?
I think there's sorry, I'm really not interested in the reshuffling and the whatever. Look, we've got 4 years or 3 years. We've had this musical chairs game for the last whatever it is, 6 or 8 years. I mean, come on, grow up.
And to the point of credibility.
Yeah, it's just get over it. Kemi's leading. Kemi's setting out the right questions at the moment. She's beginning to get on to the points that we're talking about. You're right, Rob's doing a good job. By the way, others are doing a good job too. And it's and in fact some new intake people like Katie Lamb and Harriet Cross and Nick Timothy are doing some good work as well. So it's not. It's not about one intake or another intake. It's not about who's the leader and who's the whatever. The team's working, right? But there are some areas where we really do need to challenge some of the thinking. And that's one of the things I'm going to be doing over the coming months and years, because, we have really run out of road. I mean, James hinted at this, but it is not impossible that Rachel Reeves' budget in whenever it is, October, got to assume it's in October, she finds that she can't do any of the three things the government's supposed to be able to do. She can either cut, I mean, we just found that out at the welfare vote, whenever it was a few weeks ago. She can't borrow because the markets won't lend, and that taxes actually deliver less income, as the recent capital gains tax report demonstrated. So, it is entirely possible that at her next budget, we end up getting a phone call from the IMF saying, guys, you've run out of money. This doesn't work. Now, if we're not willing to take some of these choices, if we're not willing to take on some of these sacred cows, then frankly, they're going to be forced on us, as they were in the 70s. I'm glad to say we're all too young to remember that happening, even me. But it is absolutely true that, we are now out of road, and we really do have to start thinking hard about what to change.
Triple lock's a sacred cow, isn't it?
It is a sacred cow.
Break it.
It really needs to be looked at, doesn't it? It really needs to be looked at. Look, the pension is going to be costing 3 times the defence budget by 2050, right? Now, when David Cameron and George Osborne introduced the triple lock, it was supposed to get pensioners out of poverty and to fund. Nobody expected it to be costing this much, and nobody had the predictions then of where it was going to grow into in the welfare bill. It is now a very, very significant part of welfare. You're right, it's got to be looked at.
The problem with the triple lock and its origin was it fixed an increase in spending without an increase in growth. It's we're going to continue to increase this, quite quickly, regardless of how the economy performs. And that's the type of thinking that we need to break, because now it would be very difficult to change the triple lock, very politically difficult. Because voters now expect it. They expect it in perpetuity. But there will be a point where the triple lock overtakes GDP spending. I mean, that would be a ridiculously long time in the future. But we need to go back to saying to people, if you want spending on welfare, pensions, the health system, we need to grow the economy. We need to stop rinsing businesses. We need to be, pro startup and scale up and listing. We need to really back aspiration, all of those things that get the economy growing. You need to fuel that fire. And I think because the Conservative Party hasn't made that argument as passionately as it should have done in the past, we've sort of forgotten about it. It's all about how much can we spend, and where do we spend, as opposed to how do we actually get the economy growing. Rachel Reeves has paid lip service to it, but I don't think has really seriously gone down that path.
Well, especially when you think about student loans, is that something that you would ever campaign after? I mean, the graduate tax that is, extraordinary. The interest that is applied to student loans. Is that something that you would ever consider revising?
Look, I mean, again, you're raising a really important. It's become another sacred cow. The idea that people should be paying 7-8% interest, as it was, even when it was 1% interest on housing, it's ridiculous. You simply can't be running that. But the truth is, actually, you've got to look at a hell of a lot of other things as well. Because the truth is, then
like what?
the £9,000 a year doesn't cover the cost of tuition. Okay, well, what does that mean for the university sector? What does it mean for the way that you do education in this country if you cannot afford to teach a student on an amount that is then repayable over a career?
You subsidise them with international students, yeah.
Well, that's effectively what we've done. But is that sustainable, really? Because that raises some other really serious questions as well. So this is the whole sort of area where you've got to look at these areas as a whole, and you've got to be pretty frank about it. Is it genuinely sustainable that you're going to have a multiple university systems in a single town? Is it? I don't know. But, these are really expensive ways of conducting education. Are they the best way? And we've got ourselves into a whole series of pattern of spending for a whole series of reasons. Partly is 50% of the population should go to university. Partly is we haven't, or rather we've massively slashed, and then only in the last 10 years started to pick up on apprenticeships. Partly it's because of the way that we've done student loans and and graduate tax effectively. But it now means that if you're a 30-something-year-old living in London, I don't mean central London like here, but an hour out Ealing sort of way.
Yep.
You could easily be commuting an hour each way, spending several grand on your travel card, living in a shoebox and coming back at the end of the month with, pennies in your pocket. I mean, it's
Sounds appealing.
yeah. You can understand why people aren't happy.
Yeah.
It also, the too many people going to university point comes back to the supply side point of some of those people who are going to university could be instead building a new generation of nuclear power plants, building connection of Manchester to the other northern cities, could be building those homes, could be working on a variety of high-tech industries, but our energy costs are incredibly expensive, supply side. Building anything is incredibly expensive, supply side. So those high-skilled, what you would call blue-collar jobs, but they're not really because they pay very well, those jobs aren't there. And I think it ties back to often we talk about university grads not being able to get on the housing ladder in London, but it's also the same problem is affecting people who live in different parts of the country, who are going to university, aren't getting good jobs, aren't paying back their over expensive university fees, but should really, in a balanced economy, be doing other high skilled jobs that aren't there, that we can nurture. It's just about focusing on how you do that.
Which is very well put, because I think we started to have the conversation about it probably a year ago now. And then that Mickey Mouse degrees concept came out. It was the worst way to have this conversation. It just, just sort of, because I agree with you that there are many universities who do offer degrees that are, they're just a money-making scheme that will not offer those students any better prospects in life. I think the conversation was just, you need to have it the way that you just phrased it.
I would use a personal example of somebody in my family went to university, got a degree, and is now in a relatively low-paid job. And my mum, being shoots from the hip, said, "No, don't do it. It's a total waste of time. Go and train to be an electrician. It's a really well-paid job. It's a technical job. It's skilled. You will, have a much better life." And he went through it, and now several years later, we were walking. And he said, "Do you know what? You were totally right. But the optics of going to university, how that was sold, I really turned my nose up at the idea of being an electrician. But actually, I'd be on 20 grand more than I am now." And it's just the way we talk about it is totally backward.
By the way, it's not only that. One of the things about a month ago, there was a time when I started to get the letters saying, "Little Johnny didn't get into the right school, university, whatever it is. Can you please appeal against it?" And consistently, I look at those letters and think, of course I'll try and help. But the reality is, the chances for you are so great in things like apprenticeships, where you'll end up without a debt, without all this. By the way, and it's not just blue collar work, as you put it. M&G in the city offers an apprenticeship. Lloyds Banks offers it. The number of people who offer apprenticeships these days is huge. And the great irony is, of course, most professions used to offer apprenticeships. They just didn't call them that. So you weren't an apprentice doctor, but you didn't go to university. No. You went to a medical school, and you were an apprentice on the wards while you were learning at the university. And that's how it worked. Right now, we changed it and degreified it as well. And the same is true of lawyers. Lawyers used to be articled clerks. That's an apprenticeship, but you now do a law degree, right? There was all these ways that we hid the word apprenticeship in the English language, presumably for social reasons, but whatever. We hid the word apprenticeship. We should be proud of it. We should be incredibly proud of what business and individuals can achieve if they're working together.
About restoring that dignity in work, right? Taking pride in your work.
Right. Look, a professional German apprentice who's done 6 years is known as a master. Right? It's a master apprentice. That's where the title comes from. Parity of esteem is just as important as parity of outcome.
Guys, I'm really grateful for you coming out with this conversation with us. Areas we disagreed on, areas we agreed on. I really enjoyed talking to you. Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you.
Really, really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks.